having the ability, whether you're in a company or in your garage or in your parents' basement, to come up with an idea and then follow through with a finished result is a huge, huge step forward in your viability in this world. I mean, that COVID has proven that we all have to be productive at home just as we do in the office. And I think some of the students I've talked to recently are kind of worried about the job market and everything out there because of the pandemic and everything that's going on. But what I think is wonderful is that shouldn't stop the innovation part. And once you kind of realize that the innovation doesn't have to be connected to just a specific company or even a specific place, you can kind of do it anywhere, then the ideas just flow and soar.
That is Disney Imagineer Daniel Joseph, who's here to talk about his career creating illusions and special effects for Walt Disney Imagineering, including the Hatbox Ghost at Disneyland's Haunted Mansion, plus effects for Trader Sam's, Test Track, Phantom Manor, and so much more. You're listening to the Tomorrow Society podcast. Thanks so much for joining me here on episode 127 of the Tomorrow Society podcast. I am your host, Dan Heaton. I'm really excited to bring you this week's show with Disney Imagineer Daniel Joseph, who has just such an interesting story. If you're new to this podcast, one thing that I really enjoy doing is talking with people that have worked behind the scenes at Disney or just in the industry in general, because I think their stories could be inspiring to someone who maybe wants to work at Imagineering or even just some other related creative field. Hearing how someone like Daniel, who spent time in his basement creating haunted houses and putting together various gadgets when he was younger, ultimately was able to use those skills and become successful at a really large place like Disney. So it was really cool for me to hear Daniel's progression going from where he started working at a local haunted house and then ultimately finding his way to Disney and getting involved with so many cool attractions. I mentioned a lot of them in the intro, like the Hatbox Ghost, but also there's others like Sorcerers of the Magic Kingdom, the Coco effects, which I think are super cool at the Mexico Pavilion, where you walk in right there. Daniel's been involved with a wide range of attractions, even more than we were able to cover in this interview. And beyond the specific things he's worked on, what I also think is cool about this show is that he talks about what excites him about the future of the industry, gives advice to aspiring Imagineers, and then just talks about some of his favorite attractions and his inspiration from Yale Gracey, who of course was so involved in the effects for the Haunted Mansion. You may notice slight differences to the sound quality in this. We did record this over 2 sessions. However, I think the sound quality is still good. I just wanted to mention that in case you're wondering about some switches in between. I'm just really happy to have the chance to talk to Daniel and present his story to you on this show. So let's get right to it. Here is Daniel Joseph. I'm really excited given all the things you've worked on, and just I think you have an interesting story too about how you ended up getting to Disney. So I'd love to go back even to the start before you joined. Like when you were young, like how interested were you in Disney and the parks? I mean, were they a big thing for you when you were growing up?
Well, when I was young, it was, I grew up in Delaware in the Northeast of the United States, and it certainly was always on my radar. But since we were so far away from both Disneyland and Walt Disney World, it wasn't something that I was, able to go to that often. We went to Walt Disney World maybe about every 5 years or maybe even a little more time. But it really mostly got into my life through serendipity, I would say, with my own interests, and then kind of bringing the aha moment out was Disney finally. But I, as a kid, always loved taking things apart and making things. And as a really little kid, whenever anyone would ask what I wanted to be, I would say, I want to be an inventor, and it's like, what does that mean? But it can mean all kinds of things, of course. But I got into ultimately at a very young age doing little haunted houses in my basement, and charging 25 cents for people to walk through, and giving the money to the Humane Association in Delaware, just as a nice philanthropy type little thing. But it taught me a lot about the kind of the theatrical magic process and things like that I was super interested in. It gave me a creative outlet too, because definitely at school I was not always the top of the class. I grew up with some learning differences and some dyslexia, and found that having a creative outlet at home, like making haunted attractions or little haunted houses, really gave me something that was special for me and gave me a sense of confidence. So fast forward a few years, I would say till I was about 11, and we were down in Walt Disney World for a family vacation. And the first aha moment was riding through Horizons in Epcot Center at the time, and just being in awe and absolutely at what I was seeing, and the sense of optimism and just the sense of euphoria that I had after riding that ride, and needed to ride it several times to really get that out of my system. Then a day later, going on the Haunted Mansion, I like to say, is kind of my moment of clarity, my nirvana moment, where I went through that attraction, of course, the whole time looking around, looking above, looking behind the doom buggies, and looking at everything as much as I could, and realizing, I remember getting off of the attraction and saying to my parents, there are people who made this, and they probably got paid for it. I do this kind of thing at home for fun. I want to do this. And at the time, I had no idea what an Imagineer was, but I was absolutely tunnel vision determined to find out. And I would say that Haunted Mansion first trip of thousands of trips around the Haunted Mansion down the years was the thing that sort of set me on this path. And from then on out, I just went to the library, and the infancy of the internet had just kind of started. So found a few little things out there on the internet about Imagineering, and discovered in the back of one of these Disney books about animation, this guy, Yale Gracey, who just became my Michael Jordan, I like to say. Other people, my friends, would have pictures of Michael Jordan on their wall from the Bulls as their hero. I had a picture of Yale Gracey on my wall. And that kind of set me on a path ever since then to find out everything I could about Imagineering, about Yale Gracey, and what I could do to do that kind of work in the future.
So with Yale Gracey, what was it? Because Yale Gracey, amazing effects that he created, so inventive, which definitely applies to what you were doing as a kid. But what was it about him or about those effects that inspired you so much and made you want to do this for your career?
I think the first thing was the pictures, the press releases that had been done, which were just a few, of Yale Gracey in the 60s, where he had this lab coat on, and he was either posed with one of the ghosts from the Haunted Mansion or working on something for pirates, was so cool. I mean, it was just so, it was like the mad professor to me. That this person was kind of like, that was a real mad scientist, and that was super intriguing to me. Then the second thing, which I would say is more of a second read, and it got me even more into him, was learning that this person has had a fine arts background, was very much, literally a designer and a painter, and at the same time had this other side of the brain where he would just take things and make them into other things that were spectacular. And the things that he would use, there's stories out there, like the one that really got me excited was the bent hubcap story, where he found an old chrome bent hubcap in a parking lot. And because of Yale's mind and the way he would think, he put it on a motor, put a special light source aimed onto it with an image projector, and basically created an animated moving special effects fixture that ultimately got refined and was put into many attractions through the years. That kind of like almost MacGyver notion, of taking something that's totally garbage for some people or ubiquitous for some other people, and making it into something that's this high-tech thing that people look at and say, what am I even looking at? was true magic to me. The part of that really enchanted me was, hey, I have access to bent hubcaps. I have access to, little electrical things and stuff like that. This isn't stuff that you can only get in a NASA laboratory. This is completely accessible to me, this little kid in Delaware in his parents' basement. So I grew up, there was this place near us in New Jersey called Edmond Scientific. They're now a mail order catalog, but they had this back room where they had motors and mirrors and prisms and lights and all these things from surplus parts that were taken apart that they were selling. And my grandparents would give me like $30 for my birthday to go and spend in that back room. And I would pick up a bunch of just weird and eccentric items in there and make stuff and not have a goal, but ultimately have a result of something that would do something, whether it was a primitive strobe light or some kind of weird fan device or some kind of model tram ride. That was for me kind of recreating some of the Yale Gracey type design process. So that really is what got me excited about him, is this resourcefulness and also the accessibility of that resourcefulness that I felt I could be a part of.
Right, because a lot of the effects he was doing were not the super high-tech, most modern things. They went back to theater productions from the early 20th century or even earlier. So they were things that people did when they didn't have modern technology. So I know that you ultimately went, before Disney, started working at the Eastern State Penitentiary's famed haunted house, which is called Terror Behind the Walls. So how did you bring some of that tinkering at home and that ingenuity into when you actually started working at a place like that?
Well, it was kind of funny. I was in school in Philadelphia at University of the Arts for industrial design, basically product design, high end, furniture design or appliance design, high end type stuff. And there's this organization called ISDA, Industrial Design, or IDSA, Industrial Design Society of America, which I was part of the student chapter. And one of my professors, who knew my kind of different background in design, I had friends who were designing refrigerators and things like that while I was, on the same design project, designing a refrigerator that could become clear and used things so you could see inside of it, techniques from the Haunted Mansion to make, this refrigerator work and do weird things. So my professor, knew this was a little out of the ordinary, but he knew my real passion was themed attractions and Disney. and had a friend that he had met that worked at Eastern State. They were just starting. They were looking for people to bring in for the summer. So he suggested me. I interviewed and got the job as kind of their animatronics technician and special effects designer. And I was thrilled because this was like, okay, this is my first time working at a like professional haunted attraction, where as a kid, it was always my little one in the basement. So this is my opportunity. And I really enjoyed how though I was a kid in college, they really trusted my opinions as far as like, okay, how are we going to mechanize this character with a trip sensor, and what are we going to do to centralize the fog machines and make the fog go out throughout the whole attraction from like one central source? What kind of cool laser scanning effects can we do that, might be like a liquid floor or a liquid tunnel effect that hadn't really been done in haunted attractions at that point yet. So I found myself building by hand a bunch of these things that I just pitched to them, and they're like, go ahead, try it. And they let me. And I was super excited, but I found this new side of stress of the things that I would build and being afraid that they'd break, because they had to run for sometimes hundreds of hours for all these guests to go through. So that was kind of a new feeling for me. And then not to mention, this Eastern State Penitentiary is like a real old prison. That's not my parents' basement. And that place is genuinely scary. Running around at night, turning things off before the shift is over and everything like that was, for me, sometimes a little bit of a spooky experience, and trying to get out of the building as fast as I could because no one else was there. But it was a lot of fun and a lot of cool a learning experience to do it kind of for the big guys.
Yeah, that sounds like great background for what you did further on. But yeah, I'm not sure I'd want to be there late at night, regardless of if it had the extra effects and everything too. So that probably helped a little bit. I think that would sound like a scary experience. So you ultimately then, around the similar time, I think, but was the Imaginations competition, where I know you were part of a team that developed a project that then gets submitted for a competition with Disney. I have not heard individual stories about this, so I would love to hear what it was like for you to kind of be part of this competition and how that process went.
Yeah, so the Imaginations competition I call my second senior thesis, because in school I did have a senior project, but I certainly concentrated on Imaginations the same or more than my school project. The way the Imaginations program was run back then was interesting. It was 6 groups were flown out to California that were the finalists, and they were generally 3 groups of teams and 3 groups of individuals. So it was individuals against teams in one 6 group lump sum. And then ultimately one would win, whether it was a team or whether it was a single person team. They were all kind of pitted against each other. So that was definitely interesting and daunting. I didn't have a team. It was just me, because though I tried to find kind of other people with similar interests, and I certainly had a lot of friends, a lot of people didn't want to give the time commitment that was required for it. So I just said, okay, well, I'm gonna just go for it and do it myself this time, and we'll see. Before then, I had actually tried a few things in the matter of getting into Disney through different backdoor family friends, this and that, none of which had really panned out. I met some interesting people, but nothing really got me in the door, so to speak. So I finally said, well, I'm going to do this Imaginations program. It's going to kick my butt because it's a lot of work, but I'm going to go for it. I decided to do, basically redo the People Mover that is in California that became Rocket Rods, and do a retrofit system that fits on top of what was already existent there from rocket rods and make this this ride system that can bank and turn as it goes around Tomorrowland. And at the time, Mission Space in Epcot had just opened, so I kind of tied it into the story of the Mars mission in Epcot being the West Coast version of that in Disneyland. And since I'd been studying Disney for all these years, I really wanted to put my all into it. So as far as checking all the boxes in things that I knew I could contribute, I designed uniforms and costumes for the cast members. I wrote a musical score for the attraction, and even did special effects mock-ups for the attraction in my college dorm room, which some of which set off smoke detectors. So I don't suggest doing that, but no, they proved to be some good pictures and videos that I was able to add to my presentation and really show, the thinking of this, because the Imaginations program, just to give a little background, was created by Marty Sklar in the early 90s to bring in different kind of diverse thought into Imagineering, whether it's back then there weren't as many female Imagineers as there are now. And to the credit of the Imaginations program, there are quite a bit of wonderful female Imagineers we have, as well as people from different backgrounds, different schools and parts of the country and parts of the world, from different ethnicity backgrounds and things like that, that were really necessary to bring into Imagineering, because our guests are diverse, so Imagineers should be diverse as well. So that's why the program was created. I kind of used that idea as number one. I'm not in a typical place where Disney tended to draft from, Philadelphia area, rather than the LA area or, near Orlando, typically, are where they were at that time. A lot of Imagineers were coming from. And also my background having some learning differences and things like that, I sort of thought, hey, well, that's a diverse way of thinking that I think I could benefit the company. So I kind of went all in and went, I think, a little over the top with coming up with this People Mover version 2 thing, and put it on big poster boards and made videos and all this stuff and sent it all in, because it wasn't really digital at the time. It was an analog transaction, which is kind of funny. We had to FedEx everything out and have them review it. The executives at Imagineering reviewed my entry along with a bunch of entries from all over the country and Canada, and I was one of the finalists, so I was just absolutely blown away. I couldn't believe the end of my senior year, the thing that I'd worked so hard for, specifically, going to college to be an Imagineer, maybe was going to come true. So they flew me out to LA right after graduation, and I met a bunch of two other individual finalists and 3 other team finalists. And we all, of course, became fast friends because very similar interests and passions, and got to tour Imagineering and meet real Imagineers, to which at that point I had only dreamt of doing. The big thing, walking in those hollowed walls of 1401 Flower was surreal and life-changing. And then presenting to a whole bunch of executives, I guess I was 22 at the time, presenting this idea that I'd come up with in a dorm room and standing up there alone in front of all these people, to ultimately sitting our last day of the trip there, sitting at a round table for lunch with Marty Sklar, and, being very starstruck and very, very nervous sitting next to this person. And then come to find out the reason why I was seated next to Marty was because my entry and my presentation won. So I just, from that point on, it was a dream come true. It was everything I'd wanted up to that point, kind of culminating right then and there. So I moved out to LA, with a backpack and a few $100s. And then a few months later, about a half a year later, I was able to start an internship with Walt Disney Imagineering Research and Development. So that was a 6-month internship, and that was almost 15 years ago.
Wow. So I want to ask you all about your work at Disney. I have to ask one quick question about the People Mover and Mission Space. So was that like a simul? I mean, did people wear like 3D glasses, or was there some sort of screen, or how did you connect the People Mover track beyond the part that goes past Space Mountain and everything? How did you connect that to Mission Space while you were doing it?
Well, it was mostly in the pre-show, getting you through the queue and understanding why you're about to go on these really strange vehicles. And the way I tied it in was Mission Space is sort of a test pilot mission in Epcot to train you on how to get to Mars from Earth, how to fly a rocket to Mars. And then the PMV2, or People Mover version 2, is now another training system to kind of train you on how to get around Mars once we're colonizing it. So the vehicles, to make you feel like you were in a lower gravity environment, had kind of a bogie that went along the People Mover track, and then an arm that cantilevered off of it with the vehicle with the people inside. And inside the vehicle, you were able to pan and tilt this arm as the vehicle is moving horizontally through space on the track. So you would get this kind of soaring, flying feeling that you were in charge of. And the conceit why you were at Disneyland and why you were still on Earth doing this that I kept coming back to is this is kind of a training test track for the system that's going to be on Mars. And we have the first article of it here at Disneyland, and we need you to try it. That was kind of the story conceit, my connection to Mission Space, the story-wise aspect of it. But it allowed me to not have to go with, any kind of 3D glasses or anything like that inside, because if you see Disneyland and you see Tomorrowland, that's appropriate because you are in Tomorrowland, you are in Disneyland. Just like in Mission Space in Epcot, you're in a test vehicle. You're not actually going to Mars. So it was kind of that. But it was a blast. And I think the thing with all of Imaginations, all of the Imaginations program, which it still is going on and it's still great and living on in Marty's legacy, I'm on the board and help kind of champion some of the initiatives with it, as I have since I got in the company. We're not making these attractions really. This Imaginations is very much, what's so wonderful is it's like an extended interview and a way to have new talent kind of directly make a portfolio piece that is targeted for Disney's Disney's consumption. And it's like, what you in so many words, you want to be an Imagineer, huh? Well, show me. And rather than showing in a portfolio pictures of things that maybe don't necessarily fully relate to Imagineering and all that stuff, this is a way for students, and certainly it was for me, to directly show what we can do if we were real Imagineers.
Yeah, I think it's a great program. And like you said, it's a way to, because you could tell from your idea, which I still think would be amazing, but your idea it showed the ingenuity and the work ethic that you had created this. So you went on and you started as an intern at Disney and ultimately got a full-time position. So what were some of the early projects you worked on after you joined WDI that kind of set you on the right path?
Well, when I started, I was in the research and development group for a year. And that was really interesting because research and development department is a really neat department that is very much free thinking and kind of like coming up with things that are way out 5 years, 10 years in the future, that nobody's even thought of yet. Coming to the end of my year in R&D, an opening and kind of a need showed itself in the special effects and illusions group at Imagineering, which was really kind of, for me, I like to call it the bullseye within the bullseye of Imagineering, of where I wanted to be. I mean, that is the Yale Gracey department. I want to go over there. So something opened up, and I weaseled my way over there and was able to get in. And thank goodness they were all open to it. And at that time, there hadn't been a new hire in the group for many years. And in fact, I was the youngest new hire in the group in probably over a decade. So I had all these amazing, very, very skilled and seasoned special effects designers at my disposal who, in a company like Disney or other big companies, could have the attitude, oh, there's this new kid, he's going to try to take our job away and, outshine us or any of that stuff. That wasn't at all the vibe. Every single one of them took me under their wing, and, I would ask questions about Alien Encounter or, Mount Prometheus in Tokyo Disney Seas, and every single one of them would be open. Let's go to lunch, Daniel. I'll tell you about the jet engines we used in Tokyo Disney Seas to make the volcano caldera work. It was just like all of a sudden I had access to these people that were exactly the people that I had been reading about for, the last 10 years. So the first project I got to work on, like right as I got into that group, was Da Vinci's Challenge. I think it's called still to this day, which is in Tokyo Disney Seas, and it's an adventure game. And I did some of the mock-ups for some of the interactive elements that are in that attraction. When you go throughout the park, you activate different things, and you'll see like this little lava flow effect happen, and like LEDs flicker, or just different cool gags that tend to happen throughout the place as you go through. Again, here I am right out of school, only a year into the company, and they were letting me work on circuit boards and work with the CAD department to figure out how to package things inside these cabinets. And, all the stuff has to be designed by Japanese electrical standards, stuff I had no idea anything about, but learned as I was going. And then the coolest part was, coming up with ideas and then being allowed to mock these things up and show the proof of concepts to executives. So at that time, it was Joe Cicero, who was the head of, or the portfolio lead of Tokyo Disneyland. And he would come over to our mock-up building in Glendale, and I would fire up one of the effects I was working on, and everyone would stand around, and he'd, ask questions, and then everyone would clap and everyone would go away. And I'd just be like, did that just happen? That's the coolest thing ever. Yeah. So that was the first thing out of the gate for me, the Tokyo Disneyland work. From then on out, kind of had this hunger that I still have to this day, that just unfortunately kept me so overly busy on so many different things at once that, I just worked more and more and more and had more and more projects under my belt. And I say unfortunately just because it was something that very much kind of overtook my life, even on the weekends, as far as thinking about this stuff and thinking about it before going to bed and thinking about it in the shower. But that is kind of our way of life as an Imagineer, is to really get into this work as more than a job. It's kind of like a way of thinking. So I'm trying to think, the next thing that I worked on after that was probably, the next big project that I worked on after that was probably Trader Sam's. And Trader Sam's was initially a very small project that didn't really have a big team at all. They gave me a whole bunch of creative latitude. The team had ideas of things we wanted to do in this proposed enchanted tiki bar, but wasn't a lot of clear ideas yet. So they gave me the reins to kind of go again to our mock-up building, and I built a full out tiki window with stuff. I went to Home Depot and bought parts and pieces and Venetian blinds to put in and everything like that, and fake foliage, and ultimately did my own media for a mock-up of this tiki window with an erupting volcano and birds that fly by and rain that comes down that we pitched around the company and made it into a real project. So that was another one that I was really just pleasantly excited about, the process that I was kind of given free rein to come up with what the gag was for that attraction or for that restaurant, that bar. And ultimately they let me kind of run with it. And that's what we ended up installing in Disneyland. And then people loved it so much. There's one here in Florida now too.
Trader Sam's is a real marvel, and it actually, I forget that it hasn't, I think about the one at Disneyland just being there forever because it has that kind of classic feeling, and I'm like, oh no, it's only been there for like less than 10 years, and Disneyland even, or Disney World even less. But I think it fits with your career that you worked on something like that, because there's so many kind of inventive little effects and clever nods in there that totally fit with what you've done before.
You're absolutely right. The big thing with Trader Sam's, and a lot of the work I do, but Trader Sam's epitomizes kind of the 1960s kitsch era of not only tiki, but also of like effects work. And the shipwreck effect, or the windows and how they look, the aesthetic and feel of everything, is very much about that kitsch and that warm and fuzzy, not about the technology behind it all. It still hopefully makes people look at it and say, hey, how did they do that? But not in a way that is a technology question. Yeah, Trader Sam's was really an important one. And that Trader Sam's, for me, was one of my big introductions and the start of a very a lifelong friendship with Tom Fitzgerald, who I'm very close with now. We worked on Phantom Manor together. He brought me in to work on a whole bunch of the Epcot shows that are happening now. And I accredit all that to having kind of proven myself on Trader Sam's to him. So, that's an important project for me.
Yeah, that's, I'd love to ask you quickly though. You mentioned Phantom Manor, which I went to in 2006. So well before any of the recent updates. So what did you do on that? 'Cause Phantom Manor it's such a cool attraction. I love the take that they did on the Haunted Mansion.
Oh yeah, me too. I mean, as I said before, mansion in any capacity at Disney is kind of my favorite, and I'm on this world conquest. I want to work on every Disney mansion that's out there, and I have actually at this point, except for Tokyo's Haunted Mansion. So I've worked on every other mansion, including Mystic Manor in Hong Kong. But Phantom Manor, which was a 2018 project, was really a way, in the spirit, no pun intended, of typical Tom Fitzgerald, because he's such a story-driven designer, and he has Disney storytelling down to a T. He wanted to tighten up the story of that attraction, because for many years, I think it's been a wonderful attraction, but the story is very nebulous, and in a way that's a good thing, but in another way, it might have been a little too nebulous. So that was the first reason for doing any rehab, was tightening up the story and the script a little bit. And then the second reason was, since the attraction opened in 1992, the technology from a special effects and illusion standpoint has changed hugely, and that attraction hasn't been touched since 1992. So we really needed to bring up the luster a little bit, make Leota shine again, and just get some things kind of up to snuff in there. And in doing that, changing slide projections that were very, old, and some of them not necessarily working to their fullest, to some higher res video projection techniques and stuff like that. That all is kind of mechanical changes to the attraction or behind the scenes stuff that guests don't see. But in tightening up the story of Melanie, who's the bride in there, and finding out finally, unequivocally, that her dad is the Phantom, having him appear throughout the attraction in more of a literal sense was some of the things that I pitched with Tom Fitzgerald. One of them I'm really proud of got in, and it's a whole new effect in the bride's boudoir scene, which is right before it would be the attic scene in our haunted mansions. But in that scene, she used to be crying looking into a mirror, and the mirror was kind of in the shape of a skull, or at least had an aged skull appearance to it. But I came up with the idea, and then ultimately we made a little model, scale model that worked to prove this out and get people on board with the idea, was to use, again, some old magicians' techniques, not distant from things Yale Gracey loved to do, and make the Phantom appear in the mirror as if he was kind of hovering behind the bride as she's crying, looking into the mirror. But as a guest, you're going past her, and there is no Phantom floating out there. He only is behind her from the point of view when you look in the mirror. So it's a very, very eerie, creepy, fun gag that we got to add that wasn't ever in there before. So there's a few little touches like that throughout the attraction that really kind of bring it up to speed, as well as this brand new, that I'm really proud of, this brand new stretch portrait effect that was just a dream to get to work on, where we actually do a 1-2 punch, and we created brand new stretch portraits for that scene. And the just like in typical cadence with the rest of our mansions, as the room stretches, you see what's really going on in the picture. And in this case, you see the bride with her suitor next to her. And as the room stretches, you notice that there's some kind of demise below. And the bride, as the room stretches, actually disappears from each one of the pictures. And the thought is, okay, here's what happened to each one of the suitors that went after her. But kind of a 1-2 punch, as I explained before, where we did a reveal, typical Haunted Mansion stretch portrait reveal, but also then a state change, which was really fun, making one of the characters in the paintings vanish right before your eyes. So that again, another really fun gag. The other one that I'm really proud of is in the first scene, the foyer, as you walk into Phantom Manor and are given the spiel, which, by the way, now is back to one of the original tests and thoughts of the attraction was to have Vincent Price do the narration. So we brought that back, and Vincent Price is now doing a spiel in the queue. And one of the things he talks about is, because you walk into this foyer that has dingy wallpaper, and there's water staining and cobwebs on the walls, and you can see lath and plaster poking through. And as Vincent Price says, both in French and in English, but beauty lives here still, the wallpaper right in front of your eyes heals and becomes brand new, beautiful, shining new wallpaper, like you're back in, in the glory days of this huge mansion, before it was a decrepit old manor that you had just walked in. So these kind of transformational effects were super fun, and even more fun to brainstorm with Tom Fitzgerald and the rest of the team, and coming up with, how the heck are we going to do these things? That was definitely a dream.
Yeah, wow. I really hope that sometime I'm able to get out there again to see those, because it sounds incredible. And I'm glad that in Paris in general, that with that and with other attractions, they're able to really spruce up some of the effects since it's been so long. Well, I want to make sure that we talk about the Hatbox Ghost. Speaking of updates to the Haunted Mansion. And so I know we already talked about your interest in Gracey and in the mansion. So I'd love you to walk through kind of how this project came together and what it was like for you.
Well, the Hatbox Ghost has been sort of a cult legend, cult classic legend, ever since he was installed and then uninstalled in the Haunted Mansion. And as the story goes, 1969, Hatbox Effect was in the Haunted Mansion for about a week or two until Yale Gracey couldn't take it anymore because the effect just wasn't living up to what it was supposed to do. And he personally uninstalled the thing. And the legend that I've gathered from a bunch of people in the know is that the Hatbox figure stayed in the site trailer down at Disneyland at Yale's office for years until it was basically used as parts for the graveyard scene years later. But the story internally with the Hatbox Ghost is Yale Gracey worked on this effect and mocked it up in Glendale, and was given the criteria of the location of the Doom Buggy track and the lighting in the scene, and he mimicked that. And then when he went down to install his production effect in the figure, the vehicles actually were closer than he had been told or that he had understood. And then the show lighting in that scene was a much different paradigm than he had planned for. So because of those two very crucial fundamental reasons, the effects couldn't ever really fully work. Like the head wouldn't fully disappear on the top of the shoulders because Yale couldn't isolate the lighting as well as he could in his mock-up. And then to have guests have a closer point of view, that's a huge deal. So that just was a shame because, it's not his fault. It's not really anyone's fault except for the fact that the project was just moving really fast and, the right hand didn't know what the left was doing. So he didn't want to put something in that wasn't 110%. So from then on out, the figure had just been a distant memory. And then, over the years, different websites published, it looks like the Abominable Snowman or like Bigfoot pictures of like, here's 6 frames of my Super 8 video when I was 7 years old of the Hatbox Ghost. People were just enamored by this thing, as were all of us Imagineers. I mean, we loved the way that figure looked. The Mark Davis design of that figure is just so cool. So I think it was maybe in 2012 or 2013, a few folks, one of which was someone who I had mentored. He was an Imaginations graduate, Vinny Lagozio, had worked on this Hatbox animatronic for D23 that they put in, and it was kind of a grassroots effort because they were like, yeah, we want to get some traction on excitement for this guy. So they put it in, and then there's all this excitement. So then Vinny and I, a few years later, it was a year or two later, kind of were brainstorming. And I had been working in the back of my head on ways to make the effect work. Vinny was very much an animatronic designer, guru, mechanical engineer. And I was, as I've said before, on the side of illusions and everything. I had come up with a solution on how to do it that I thought might work. So we got to work making a very crude mock-up of the Hatbox Ghost with a Halloween mask and some 2x4s, some pneumatic pistons, some 3D printed parts, lots of hot glue and stuff like that. Very similar to things I would have done in my basement, 15 years earlier. And we had a working mock-up of the Hatbox Ghost where you can stand a foot away from this thing and his head would completely disappear and you couldn't figure out how it was working. So we pitched that very, very rough mock-up to, again, Tom Fitzgerald and some other executives, and they all were just so excited. Tom is a huge Haunted Mansion fan because that's where he started as a young person in Walt Disney World, he was actually a host at the Haunted Mansion, so he has a soft spot for it as well. And they were able to absolutely, I in debt to them, get it into the 60th anniversary scope. So we were able to then get funding and get the go-ahead to make a Hatbox Ghost for the 60th anniversary of Disneyland, and it became a real project really quickly. So, from then on out, it was just go, 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 go. We got to get this thing in really fast, and we did. And boy, was that a surreal and extra fun project.
Yeah, I mean, it's so exciting to have it there, and it's so close to the track, and it just fits in that that little kind of nook right there as you're heading more towards the big ballroom scene. It's a really good spot, and I love it there. So I also wanted to ask you about the Sorcerers of the Magic Kingdom, which is kind of an interesting project, especially when it started, there wasn't really anything that much like it. So I'd love to hear a little bit about what it was like for you to work on kind of what was sort of a new concept for Disney.
Yeah, Sorcerers of the Magic Kingdom was especially fun. It was one of the early projects in my career too. What made it really fun was the idea of doing illusions and special effects outdoors and being able to do them in direct sunlight for guests, because that usually is the antithesis of where we special effects people like to do our work. Usually it's in a dark space with lighting control and all that, usual stuff. But this was a unique challenge that I was actually really excited about. So it started out kind of early on with one of our designers, Jonathan Ackley, who was one of the instrumental folks who worked on Kim Possible and projects like that, as well as the Da Vinci's Challenge project I had mentioned before. And he came to me and another colleague and basically gave us the funding and the ability to do some development work on outdoor daylight visible special effects. And it was such a cool thing, because we got to build kind of this test lab that we had in California, and then we moved all of our stuff to Florida to a lab there that we got to try out some of the stuff as well, and integrate everything into the new kind of magic band technology that was being developed and all that stuff. But it was really interesting to try, do trial and error with different ideas on how to make characters appear and disappear in a magical way outside. And some of them didn't work, some of them worked really well, and we just kind of failed early and failed early, succeeded fast on some things, and threw out things that didn't work and moved ahead with things that did work, and presented the special effects to executives who all got really excited about it and let the project go forward, and it became Sorcerers of the Magic Kingdom. But yeah, it was a really interesting one, and since then I haven't actually gotten to work on anything that really that large in scope, because we had 22 locations all throughout the Magic Kingdom that needed custom installations. And because of that, the installation times were only at night after hours, so after guests left for the day, and before guests came early in the morning. So it was always working on what we call third shift, and in these really usually retrofitted old parts of buildings that go back to 1971, and trying to get all these new effects and illusions into them was pretty wild in its scale. So yeah, for that one, that will make it extra memorable.
Yeah, I mean, how difficult was that when you were trying? Because, like you said, there's 22 locations. They're all different. There's different windows and different areas. How tricky was it to kind of figure out up front even how to make it work in these different types of structures? And like you mentioned, lighting, they might have different shade and different, a lot of different areas that you could run into.
That was exactly the challenge. Every single location was so different and so unique. And also, you think of the Magic Kingdom, which again opened 1971, but there have been so many changes and improvements, and buildings have been altered over the past, at this point, 50 years, just about. And in those 50 years, it's just different change after change, as far as walls being moved and all this stuff, which made putting in these custom installations really difficult, and having to kind of do archaeology to find drawing sets from when was the last construction project here. Oh, we'll find, here's one from 1973 that's hand drawn, on this old style blueprint paper that we have to decipher. And that was amazing. And then to your other point, the sun and different shade issues with southern exposure versus different things, like the way the sun would move through the sky versus different parts of the year, was something that we ended up modeling a little bit in SketchUp and figuring out kind of where our light and shadows would be, so I could do some of these special effects and count on either full sunlight all the time, or at least a little bit of shadow sometimes, because some effects really require at least some kind of darkness. So some of that we were able to figure out up front, but a lot of it we really had to just go out there and test it, do it in person.
Yeah, I can imagine that had to be a very difficult, but it ended up working out really well. Well, I know another project you worked on, which was around a similar time, I believe, was the updates to Test Track, which I believe also was late 2012 when it reopened. I'd love to know kind of what you were involved with for that, and kind of what it was like to update something that was existing.
Test Track, I look back at still to this day. I mean, I've worked on a ton of projects all over the world, but Test Track was a dream. Number one, I know, like a person after, your own heart, I'm a huge original Epcot Center fan. And whenever I get an opportunity to work on Epcot, I really want, I want that and take it. And then the other opportunity was I really loved the team. It was a bunch of young designers like myself at the time, and we were all already kind of good friends. So it was a neat camaraderie to jump into this project. And then the last being exactly what you said. It's an existing project, or an existing attraction that already was extremely popular. Test Track is one of the most popular attractions on Disney World property to today. And what we were being asked to do was work with Chevrolet and GM, again, kind of like the Epcot partnership with industry, which I thought was really cool, and not change the concept and the notion of the attraction, but change kind of the feel and the aesthetic of the attraction to more mesh with GM and Chevrolet's futuristic stuff that they were going forward with at the time, and now actually even more with their electric cars things. So my work on that was some of the queue special effects there's some projection mapping as well as multiplanar displays. So in the queue, before you get to the area where you get to design your car, there's some neat projection mapping on this big car form that we worked on, as well as this new invention that I got to create and implement in that attraction, where we take these transparent LCD panels and put them in front of regular LCDs, and you get kind of this 3D holographic display effect. That was kind of fun. Then inside the attraction, all of the special effects were updated, and I got to kind of concept mock up and then ultimately install the stuff that's in there. The transparent floating displays at the different stops as you're going through, some of the laser effects. There's this giant lightning bolt that hits. That was a really fun effect to work on and create. There's I don't know if people see them as they go through because they're going really fast, but there's these neat stars that are on the ceiling and things like that. So really kind of the icing on the cake type things in there I got to work on and install, and really loved especially that working on that attraction because the building is just incredible. That show building being a 1982 original, classic from World of Motion, is an incredible scale. It's a huge building with just huge everything in it, and there's still a lot in it from even the original Epcot Center days that you can find, which is really neat to walk around and discover as we were working on it.
Yeah, I mean, I loved World of Motion, and still one of my favorite kind of classic ones. I will say that Test Track, and especially even the update, I feel is not an example where I go like, oh my gosh, this is terrible. I think that the effects in the update, like you mentioned, the lightning bolt and some of those, I think are really cool and kind of fit with the Epcot aesthetic. But so I have to ask you before we move on to another attraction, what have you found of World of Motion that's still in the building? Could you tell me, is there something like, a tidbit or something that's in there?
There's a few little, and honestly, in a lot of our attractions, there's little tidbits that either on purpose or because of posterity are left behind. I don't honestly know, but I just love finding them. But in Test Track, they're behind a duvetine curtain. There's still a brick wall it's a painted brick wall, like with a faux finish on it. That's from the train robbery scene in World of Motion. And yeah, it's still there. It's as you're flying through right after the climate chambers and into like the speed area where you're going around turns. It's just behind a curtain in there. So nice little kind of hidden homages and links to Disney history all throughout the place.
Well, excellent. Well, I wanted to ask you, too, about something else at Epcot, which is at the Mexico Pavilion, which we really liked seeing the illusions having to do with Coco that were kind of when you walk into that giant structure. I thought those were really neat effects as something, just kind of an added touch beyond like a big, large-scale ride. So I wondered if you could talk a bit about those and kind of how that worked.
Well, the Coco work was, I had just moved to Florida. I'd been in California Imagineering for about 10 years, and then got transferred to Florida to start this Illusioneering and Illusion Development Group Florida, and was working on some invisible ultraviolet kind of illusions and effects that are basically a way of printing special inks and working with a manufacturer to make them so they only show up when you shine a ultraviolet light on it, and then when you take the light away, the image is completely invisible. So I'd been working on that, and a project team approached me about this Coco project that they wanted to do in conjunction with the film coming out at the time. So we came up with the idea of doing one side of the exhibit as an ofrenda, kind of an altar, and doing an illusion I'd been working on to make different ghosts appear. So we made, in this case, the family of Miguel, his ancestors, appear around him, and then really, really cute little gag that a lot of people miss, but I love because I'm a dog person, is his dog next to him, Dante. When the relatives appear, his tail starts wagging, which is really cute. And then on the other side of the exhibit space, we did the famous cemetery from Coco, which is just, a beautiful, beautiful scene in the film. And we did that as kind of a pop-up book diorama. And that's where we really got to use this exciting new invisible ultraviolet technique that we were pioneering. And it's basically a daytime, nighttime scene. Very, very analog illusion work, which is, as I mentioned with Yale Gracey, that's my love, kind of going with less computers, more magic, if you will. And the whole scene is lit daylight, kind of magic hour at the end of the day. And then with a transition, everything then switches over to black light. and all of the surfaces that were lit with white light now show lit candles and ghosts and skeleton ancestors around them and different glowing flowers and all kinds of cool stuff. And the whole scene just changes. And it's very, very, it's kind of very technique and materials based, less technology based. And I really think because of that, there's kind of a tangibility to it that people tend to be drawn to.
Yeah, totally. And it actually kind of connects to what we were talking about earlier with Yale Gracey and with some of the effects and what you were interested in. And that kind of leads well into kind of a larger question that I had for you. You've mentioned already a few Imagineers like Tom Fitzgerald and others that you had a good connection with. But I'd love to know for you, what were some like big mentors or other Imagineers that you worked with that really inspired you, that you work with directly or even from the past?
Yale Gracey, as I said, was kind of my guiding light. And I got into the company, and, a lot of people also really looked up to him. And some even, I was amazed to find out actually worked for him. Some folks that I eventually got synced up with were interns of his during early Epcot Center work. And when I found these things out, I would just, immediately gravitate to these guys and say, okay, we're going out to lunch. I need 2 hours of your time, and I need to ask you so many questions. And just like so many other Imagineers, these people are just all too ready and willing to mentor and talk to the new guy coming in, especially, if you know your history and have respect for it. A lot of these people respect that, right? If you show love for something they've really worked on their whole life and that you do truly love, of course they're gonna really open up about this stuff. But few of the people that specifically worked with Yale Gracey, one is Gary Powell, who's still at Imagineering, and another is Tom LeDuc, who just recently retired from Imagineering. And they were both basically intern mock-up guys for Yale Gracey in the late 70s, early 80s. Just hearing stories about these guys, we would go out for tacos or something somewhere in Glendale, and they'd regale me with stories of doing some mock-ups and playing with, different kinds of ripple glass and these projectors called 10x10s that were made at the Disney studio machine shop back in the day. Pre-video, of course, because video wasn't really available, so Disney made its own moving slide projectors, and these guys would create crazy contraptions with these different machinery pieces and optics, and then at the end of the day go and hang out in Yale Gracey's office, and he'd sit there with a pipe and say, okay, what'd you work on today? And they'd just casually talk about it and maybe do some sketching, and then call it a day or go out, have a drink somewhere. Very casual, kind of neat creative environment. So that for me was just awesome to hear these firsthand stories of Yale, because all I knew about him was things I had read and devoured from kind of like the internet and books. But that was a whole new level of personal connection. Some of the folks that really have mentored me and then, have created mentoring in my life to be very important for the next generation are the folks in special effects proper, the special effects department. And one of them, a gentleman, Joe Gutierrez, who really took me under his wing when I started in the special effects group. He is, I can say without any doubt, the authority on mirror special effects and illusions for the whole world. This guy is just brilliant, and we joke. He and I are very close. He came to my wedding ultimately, but Joe speaks in mirror, meaning we could be at lunch together talking about reflection illusion or something like that, and he's talking about the different bounces of the reflection and how this would be backwards, and then we make it right side up, and he's using his hands while he's describing this and then drawing on a napkin. we have a shorthand with one another, but you can't really speak that way to just everyone because people tend to get lost. Literally speaking in mirror kind of is speaking in reverse. So, he was definitely has been an important mentor for me. And then as people have been coming in through the Imaginations program, I've been trying to help pay it forward a little bit and mentoring a lot of the young new designers that we get to bring in through that program, whether it's kind of a formal mentoring, we meet once a week and have a coffee and talk about things or whatever, to more of what I tend to like even more, which is the informal thing, where we're working on a project together and I kind of give them leeway or free rein to go and try some stuff, come back, help point them in a little more direction, have them go away and come back and, kind of keep counseling them on the trajectory of what they're working on. That has been amazing. And I'm working with a few people right now, and they're becoming amazing illusion designers in kind of this very, very niche field that is my own.
Oh, that's great to hear. Yeah. And it sounds like you having such good mentors definitely led you kind of on a path, like you said, where you're kind of doing the same thing. Well, that relates to another question I have, which is kind of when you're looking at the future of Imagineering or what you do, kind of what excites you right now about the future of the parks or even about effects and what can be done there?
That's a great question and a very specific to Imagineering answer, I would say. And the first part of that, I would say, is Imagineering has always been such a unique place because so much of the work, the design, and the invention, and then some of the manufacturing is done completely in-house. And the fact that there's a company, as big as Disney, and there's these specialties, people who are artificial foliage designers, people who are stained glass artisan designers, or people like me who are illusioneers, as Walt liked to call my type, is a really kind of a boutique thing that Disney keeps this in-house and keeps these cards close because we know and Disney knows this is one of the differentiators, right? This is one of the things that makes Disney special are some of these very, very unique things that are come up in-house and are able to be shown just in Disney parks. I think with that, it's really important that the stuff is constantly flowing, the new and the dazzling, if you will, because just as Walt would always put it, you gotta keep up the park. You gotta always move ahead. That's what helps people come back. I very much see kind of the magic side of what we do in the parks with some of the illusions and things that you see throughout the park and walk past and say, how the heck did they do that? Or only Disney could do that as one of the core competencies of the company. So I'm finding I'm getting more and more traction, actually, as I'm doing more and more of these edgy kind of new, how did they do that type illusions in my work. And just in my lab in Florida, we've come up with a whole bunch of different things, and of course some of the stuff is even out there as patentable and stuff like that. But the important thing is that it's new and that it hasn't ever been done in a theme park before. So we're kind of like inventors, which is, as I said when I was a little kid, what do you want to do when you grow up, Daniel? I want to be an inventor. Well, we get to really strive for that every day now. I think that's what's being rewarded and being pushed more and more at Imagineering is keep inventing, to keep coming up with stuff that we've never seen before, that we can't just go out there and buy at, XYZ, a special effects store, if that kind of thing exists. there's a big push and urge and fostering of that, which has been great. So I think the company is wanting more and more of this, and it really gives us who are in the Illusioneering lab and in the special effects group even kind of more ammo now to do this kind of work.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because I know with any successful entity like Disney, you could get a little complacent. So it's exciting for me to hear that there's so much emphasis on R&D and on innovation, and that you've been able to do so many cool things just in your role, because I'm sure it's more exciting for you.
It is. You know, there's a thrill, and there's a runner's high almost when you come up with an idea in the shower or before bed is my brainstorming time, right when I'm falling asleep. And then go into work the next morning and put some foam core together and some scotch tape and mirrors or whatever it might be, and stand back and you're like, holy mackerel, that works. That absolutely works. And, you know, now at that point it's like, okay, who do I tell and how do I explain this to get this to be, you know, part of a big project? And there are so many people at this point who are just, you know, completely out there and open and want that stuff. I've absolutely loved it. I think it's giving more and more opportunity. Now I know with COVID and the world the way it is, it's harder to get together with people and to do my favorite thing, which is to kind of demonstrate or do a show and tell of these things. But I've gotten very used to doing show and tells and demonstrations over Zoom.
I just wanted to ask you one kind of very different question. I would love to know, what are some, beyond the Haunted Mansion and all the mansions, what are some of your favorite attractions? Like, what do you like to do, or what interests you about what's come out recently or even from the past?
I love attractions that have an inspirational, aspirational edge to them. You know, things like, you know, all of Epcot still very much imparts that feeling. And I'm really excited about a bunch of the new Epcot kind of 3.0, I guess we could say, stuff that's coming online very shortly. You know, I'm working on Guardians, the Guardians attraction. I'm working on the Space Restaurant, which you know, all have been announced and everything like that. But there's very, very little information out about them. But I can just say that they're really fun, and they're very much in the cadence of that Epcot Center feel that a lot of us so much love.
So we've talked about so much on that you've worked on, and I'm really excited about some of the things in the future that you just mentioned. But I'd love to know for you, is there another favorite project or something you've done, big or small, that we haven't really addressed that you really had a great experience doing?
Yeah, one of the other projects that it was kind of a little gem, fly by night project that myself, very close producer friend of mine, Jim Clark, and a designer artist friend of mine, Brian Crosby, all got to work together simply out of passion. I mean, this was something that we did in our spare time and then became a real project, was the change portraits for Magic Kingdom and the Haunted Mansion shop, Memento Mori. And they, I don't know if you are familiar with those, but you would basically get your picture taken, spirit photography, and then you can get a print after that of a lenticular of you changing into a ghost.
Right. I haven't gotten one myself, but I am familiar. Yeah, those are fascinating.
That was, again, such a neat process, because I mean, the end result was unusual for us because we made a product. And typically we're making attractions, you know, not necessarily products. But it was something where the three of us were really into Museum of the Weird, the Raleigh Crump concept for the kind of the Haunted Mansion Act B. But we came up with the idea, can we do something like this change portrait a live thing, something that can happen relatively immediately versus taking an artist, hours and hours and hours to do. And we did a bunch of work and did a bunch of pitches and did some testing with different techniques and technologies, and we're able to kind of get everything aligned to the point where we were able to get people interested in it enough to try it out in the parks. We had it running in the Magic Kingdom, I believe it was 2 or 3 years, and it's not there at the moment, but there's still a lot of interest and people still talk about it and everything. And we all kind of think it's funny because it was just this little idea of a project nobody asked us to do, but ultimately people were really excited about in the end. And I think that just as a little cross-section of WDI is an important tale, because the company is definitely open to those grassroots ideas and concepts. Not everything has to be on a master plan and everything like that to be considered. So that was a really fun little project.
Well, yeah, and I think Memento Mori is a perfect example of something that kind of fans of an attraction are just so interested in. The mansion's a perfect example, but just like that next level of whether it's souvenirs or things like you mentioned that are just beyond a t-shirt or something simple, and the fact that you and Imagineering can be involved with that is great. So I know we're almost out of time and there's so many things I'd want to ask you, but I really just want to sum up, like kind of a summary question, which is, you have a really interesting story about Imaginations competition and everything you've done. So I know there's tons of young Imagineers or young aspiring Imagineers want to work in the industry. Like, from your experience, like, what advice would you give them if they are interested either in school or beyond, like to work for Disney or a similar company?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is that it's absolutely attainable right now. The fact that we live in an age where you have access in your garage to 3D printers and laser cutters and all these crazy pieces of equipment that even 10 years ago were only in high-end laboratories and shops at NASA is amazing. That has leveled the playing field for innovation. And I think the thing that I found moreover than anything is Disney, we are a story company, of course, and we start with a story and all that stuff. But above all, we are into innovating and invention, and being a student and being in design school or architecture school or wherever is all about creation, right? You're in school to learn how to either design, create, or make something. And that ultimately is the end result of what is done at Imagineering. And it's the process, sure, is amazing and fun and interesting, but it's the end result, which is a thing, most likely a place, attraction, a script. It's some sort of end result thing is the end result. And I think having the ability, whether you're in a company or in your garage or in your parents' basement, to come up with an idea and then follow through with a finished result is a huge, huge step forward in your viability in this world. I mean, that COVID has proven that we all have to be productive at home just as we do in the office. And I think some of the students I've talked to recently are kind of worried about the job market and everything out there because of the pandemic and everything that's going on. But what I think is wonderful is that shouldn't stop the innovation part. And once you kind of realize that the innovation doesn't have to be connected to just a specific company or even a specific place, you can kind of do it anywhere, then the ideas just flow and soar. And that's an incredible power that so many young people, and I think people who are just getting out there in the world out of school, have this incredible power to be a part of.
Well, Daniel, this has been so great to talk with you and to get so far in depth with your career. Thank you so much for being on the podcast and for just being able to pass along such great information.
Yeah, no, my pleasure. I really appreciate the time. And, I love helping to inspire the next generation of Imagineers and inventors out there. I think that is the real future of all of this stuff. So, I ask everyone that's out there that's interested in a career at Imagineering or even just invention in some way to go for it, because it really can come true.
Just want to give a big thanks to Daniel for being so generous with his time and talking about his extensive career with Disney. Also want to say thanks to Kevin at Disney who helped make this show possible. Also, I'm going to be doing a show in February where I talk about some ideas that I would have, armchair Imagineering, for Disneyland's Tomorrowland. I did a similar thing last summer with Epcot. I'm zoning in a bit to just focus on one land. A big part of that show will be ideas from you. Send me an email, dan@tomorrowsociety.com, Twitter @tomorrowsoc, Facebook, Instagram @tomorrowsociety, even record an MP3 that I would play on the show. I love to get you involved in making this a really cool podcast. Submit your ideas by February 10th. If you enjoyed this show, please leave ratings and reviews on Apple Podcasts. They make a huge difference in spreading the word about the podcast. If you'd like to support the show, go to tomorrowsociety.com/member to learn about a cool way you can help to keep this show rolling along and receive some cool perks too. Tomorrow's Society Podcast is hosted, produced, and edited by Dan Heaton. The music was written by Adam Hookey and performed by the Sophisticated Babies. Next time, I will be talking with Brett Nachman of the Notably Disney podcast. We are going to draft Disney composers, which is really just an excuse to talk about some of our favorite music from the Disney parks. It's going to be super fun. Thanks so much for listening. I'll talk to you again next time.